The hum of the office printer was the only thing louder than my sighs that afternoon. For coffee's deep, eyelids heavy, I was ready to marry caffeine itself if it promised to keep me awake. The marketing report on my screen looked less like data and more like abstract art. "Lily, you're going to float away if you drink one more cup," Vanessa teased, leaning against my desk with a mischievous grin. "Let me float," I groaned dramatically, sipping anyway. "At least up there, I don't have to hear about client revisions." Vanessa laughed, the kind of laugh that made Mondays bearable. "Speaking of torture," she said, "how was your date last night?" I gave her a long look. "Disastrous?" He spent half the time talking about his car and the other half checking his phone. When I told him my mom was sick last week, he literally looked at his watch. "Wow," she said. Prince Charming really outdid himself. I shrugged. At this point, I'm done with dating. My cactus collection is the only relationship that's still thriving. Vanessa laughed. "At least your cacti don't ghost you." "Exactly. They may be prickly, but at least they stick around." We both giggled, the sound echoing over the clack of keyboards and office chatter. It was in that moment, somewhere between sarcasm and caffeine overdose, that I made the mistake that started everything. "If I ever go on another date," I said, raising my mug like a toast, "I want someone who truly loves their mother. Maybe I'll even bring mine just to see how he reacts. A real mom test." Vanessa snorted. "Oh, I'd pay to see that." Imagine the guy's face. I didn't notice it then, but over the top of my monitor, a pair of quiet eyes behind thin glasses were watching us. Ethan Miller, the programmer from IT, the man who could fix a server crash faster than he could start a conversation. His desk was always spotless, color-coded sticky notes, neatly lined pens, and not a single coffee stain in sight. He barely spoke in meetings, but when he did, people listened. Some called him odd. Others called him genius. I called him interesting. 2 days later, I was finishing a report when a shadow fell over my desk. "Hi, Ethan," I said, glancing up, and froze. He was standing there, gripping his office badge with both hands like a nervous schoolboy holding a confession letter. He began, voice barely above a whisper. "I was wondering, maybe, would you like to have dinner with me sometime?" I blinked. Ethan Miller, asking me out. He looked ready to bolt, so I smiled before overthinking it. "Sure, why not?" His face lit up. "Tomorrow night? There's a nice place downtown. Sounds perfect," I said. And just like that, my mouth outran my brain. The moment he walked away, Vanessa appeared at my side like she'd been summoned by gossip radar. "You said yes to Ethan, the weirdest guy in the office." "Don't call him that," I said quickly. "He's just different." Different as in calculates his grocery list in binary different. I rolled my eyes. "You're impossible." She grinned. "Fine, fine. But you have to tell me everything afterward. If he brings his laptop to dinner, I want screenshots." I laughed it off, but as the clock ticked toward the end of the workday, a strange mix of curiosity and nerves filled me. What if Ethan wasn't as weird as everyone said? What if there was something more beneath that quiet, reserved exterior? I didn't know then that the dinner ahead would become the most awkward, hilarious, and unexpectedly heartwarming night of my life. But when Ethan finally walked into the restaurant the next evening, he wasn't alone, and the person standing beside him made my jaw drop. The restaurant smelled faintly of vanilla and roasted herbs, the kind of cozy, candle-lit place that practically whispered, "Date night." I arrived 10 minutes early, nerves doing a small dance in my stomach. The dim light bounced off crystal glasses, the soft music hummed like a heartbeat in the background, and for once, I felt excited. Maybe Ethan would surprise me. Maybe, beneath the plaid shirts and shy smiles, there was something unexpected. I checked my reflection in the window. Neat hair, light lipstick, just enough perfume. Perfectly casual for what I assumed would be an awkward but harmless evening. Then the door opened. Ethan walked in. And beside him was an elegant older woman. She had silver hair, neatly tied in a low bun, pearl earrings, and a smile that radiated warmth. The kind that instantly said, "I bake cookies and give life advice." I blinked, confused. Maybe she was a coworker or a relative who needed a ride. But when Ethan waved and started walking toward me, her following, my heart dropped into my heels. "Lily," he said, sounding genuinely pleased. "This is my mother, Margaret. I hope you don't mind her joining us." If the restaurant had suddenly gone silent, it would have made no difference. My brain just froze. His mother. My smile faltered somewhere between disbelief and a nervous twitch. "Oh, your mother." Of course. Before I could even process the situation, Margaret extended her arms and hugged me. "Oh, sweetheart, don't look so alarmed. I don't bite," she said with a bright laugh. "Only if the food is bad." I laughed too, more out of shock than humor, and watched as Ethan, ever the gentleman, pulled out a chair for her first, then for me. The waiter appeared. "Good evening. Would you like to start with something to drink?" "I'll have water," I blurted, because clearly I needed clarity, not cocktails. Margaret ordered white wine. Ethan went for lemonade, and somehow, the three of us sat down as if this was completely normal. The first few minutes were painful. Margaret beamed at both of us, blissfully unaware of my internal panic. Ethan sat upright, polite, calm, like bringing his mother on a first date was just another Tuesday. "So, Lily," Margaret began cheerfully, "Ethan told me you work in marketing. That must be fascinating, understanding how people think." I nodded quickly. "Yes. It's very creative. Keeps me busy." "Wonderful," she said. "I always thought Ethan would end up with someone artistic. He was such a creative child." "Mom," Ethan murmured, clearly embarrassed. But Margaret wasn't one to be silenced. She chuckled and leaned toward me. "When he was 12, he built a tiny software to catalog the rocks he collected in our garden. He called it Stone 2.0. I couldn't help but smile. "That's adorable." Ethan blushed, staring at his water like it might save him. As the food arrived, the tension started to melt. Margaret was surprisingly delightful. She told stories that made me laugh, about Ethan's childhood inventions, his fear of slides, and his habit of overanalyzing restaurant menus like legal documents. Ethan occasionally muttered a mortified, "Mom." But even he began to relax. I started seeing a new side of him, gentle, funny, incredibly caring. The way he looked at her, with patience and admiration, struck me deeply. Somewhere between her story about teaching literature and Ethan's quiet jokes about orchids and coding, I realized. This was actually nice. The weirdest first date in the world, but nice. When dessert arrived, I was fully at ease. Margaret had become a friend, not an intruder. Ethan was smiling more, even teasing me about my caffeine addiction. For a moment, everything felt perfect. Then Ethan tilted his head and asked, with complete sincerity, "So, when does your mother arrive?" The spoon froze halfway to my mouth. "My mother," he nodded politely. "Yes. Didn't you say you were bringing her too?" For a heartbeat, I couldn't breathe. Then, like a movie playing backward in my mind, I heard my own voice from 2 days ago. "Maybe I'll bring my mom on my next date just to see how he reacts." Oh, my God, he overheard me. He actually thought I was serious. A laugh bubbled up from my throat before I could stop it. I covered my mouth, trying to contain it, but tears of laughter blurred my eyes. Margaret looked between us, puzzled. Then it dawned on her too. "Oh, Ethan. Dear," she said with amusement dancing in her voice. "I told you that sounded odd. Nobody takes their mother on a first date, darling." She was joking. Ethan's face turned crimson. "Oh." He rubbed the back of his neck. I guess I misunderstood." At that point, none of us could hold it in. The three of us burst into laughter so loud that nearby tables turned to stare. It wasn't mocking or mean. It was pure. The kind of laughter that breaks down walls. When I finally caught my breath, I wiped a tear and said between giggles, "Well, for the record, this might be the weirdest date of my life." Margaret winked. "Sometimes the weirdest ones are the best, dear." And somehow, I had the strange feeling she was right. But little did I know, that one misunderstanding was only the beginning. Because what happened after that dinner changed everything I thought I knew about love. And about morning sunlight filtered through my blinds, warm and golden, as if the universe itself was whispering, "So, how was the weirdest date of your life?" I groaned, burying my face into the pillow. The images replayed like an emotional blooper reel. Ethan's shy smile, his mom's cheerful chatter, and that unforgettable moment when I realized he actually thought I was serious about bringing my mom too. I wanted to laugh and hide at the same time. My phone buzzed. Vanessa, my best friend, coworker, and resident chaos consultant. Vanessa, Sue. How did it go with the office weirdo? Define go. Vanessa, you either kissed him or buried him. Which is it? I sighed and called her. The second she answered, I didn't even say hello. It brought his mother. A beat of silence. Then, the loudest burst of laughter I've ever heard. Vanessa wheezed between breaths. Please tell me you're joking. On a date? Yes, I said, staring at the ceiling. His mother, Vanessa, a real human, with pearls and stories about his rock collection. Oh my God, she cried. He's officially a legend. The guy who brought his mom to dinner. You can't make this stuff up. Yeah, well, apparently it was my fault, I muttered. Vanessa stopped laughing. What do you mean? I explained the whole misunderstanding. How Ethan overheard my sarcastic comment about bringing my mom on a date, and took it completely seriously. There was a long pause. Then Vanessa said softly, wow, that's actually kind of sweet. I sat up, baffled. He brought his mother. Who does that? The kind of guy who listens too closely, she said, and cares too much about doing the right thing. I blinked. That thought hit harder than I expected. Because the truth was, Ethan hadn't been weird last night. Not really. He'd been gentle, respectful, even kind of charming once I got past the awkward start. The way he cared for his mom, how patient he was, how genuinely he'd wanted me to have a good time. None of it came from pretense. It came from heart. Vanessa's voice softened. You know, maybe he's not the weirdo everyone thinks he is. Maybe he's just real. That's rare these days. Her words lingered long after the call ended. Later that afternoon, as I sipped coffee at my favorite spot downtown, I caught myself smiling, not at my phone, not at a meme, but at a memory. Margaret's laugh, Ethan's embarrassed grin, that honest awkwardness that somehow made the night unforgettable. My phone buzzed again. A text from Ethan. Ethan, hey, Lily. About last night, I owe you an apology. Ethan, I didn't mean to make things weird. I just wanted to make a good impression. I typed, deleted, and retyped at least 5 replies before finally sending one. Lily, you definitely made an impression. But don't worry, your mom's wonderful. 3 dots appeared. Then his reply came almost instantly. Ethan, she said the same about you. Ethan, can I make it up to you? Just the two of us this time. No moms, I promise. I felt my heart do that stupid fluttery thing it hadn't done in a long time. For reasons I couldn't explain, I typed back before I could overthink it. Lily, alright. Coffee. Tomorrow, 5 p.m. He replied with a smile emoji. Simple. Genuine, like everything about him. As I stared out the window, the sunset melting into orange and pink, a quiet warmth filled my chest. Maybe life wasn't about perfect dates or ideal people. Maybe it was about moments that felt real, even if they were a little weird. And somehow, Ethan was starting to feel real. But just when I started to believe maybe this could be something real, I walked into that coffee shop and saw who was sitting beside Ethan. The bell above the cafe door chimed softly as I stepped in, carrying that familiar mix of roasted coffee, cinnamon, and anticipation. I'd spent half the afternoon convincing myself that this wasn't a big deal. Just coffee. Just conversation. Just the weirdest guy at work who accidentally turned our first date into a family reunion. And yet, my heart was thudding like it hadn't gotten the memo. I spotted him immediately. Ethan, sitting by the window. The golden light touched his hair, giving it a faint halo. He looked up as I entered, his face brightening instantly. But then I noticed someone was sitting beside him. A little girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old, wearing a pink sweater, her legs swinging freely from the chair. She was coloring in a small sketchbook, humming softly to herself. My steps faltered. Ethan stood up quickly, looking sheepish but smiling nervously. Hey, Lily, I can explain. I blinked. You brought someone. He rubbed the back of his neck. That same awkward, boyish gesture I was starting to recognize. Yeah, I didn't plan on it. But her babysitter canceled last minute. The little girl looked up then, big brown eyes, shy smile. Hi, she said softly. I'm Emma. Something in her tone melted me instantly. Hi Emma, I said, smiling. That's a pretty drawing, she beamed. It's a sunflower. Daddy says they always turn to the light. Daddy. I turned back to Ethan, my confusion finally spilling out. Wait, she's your daughter. He nodded slowly, eyes full of both apology and quiet honesty. Yeah, I should have told you before. I just didn't want to scare you away. For a moment, everything around me faded. The soft chatter, the clinking of cups, even the music. I just stared at him, this man who everyone at work teased for being weird, shy, too quiet, and suddenly, everything made sense. The calmness, the thoughtfulness, the way he listened instead of talking over people. He wasn't awkward, he was careful. Because life had already made him grow up faster than most, he sat back down, his hands folded on the table. I had Emma young. Her mom passed away a few years ago. It's been just us since. His voice didn't break, but it carried a softness that did something to my chest. Emma, oblivious to the weight of his words, kept coloring. Daddy says mommy's in the sky, but she still watches my drawings. I swallowed hard. She sounds wonderful. Ethan nodded. She was. Then, hesitantly, I know this isn't how normal dates go. But I didn't want to lie to you, Lily. I wanted you to know who I really am. The honesty in his eyes, that raw, unfiltered sincerity, hit me harder than any fancy dinner ever could. I sat down quietly. You know what, Ethan? I said softly. Maybe it's not normal. But maybe that's what makes it real. He exhaled, like he'd been holding that breath for days. The three of us talked. About art, about Emma's favorite cartoons, about Ethan's job and my projects. And in between laughter and coffee refills, I caught tiny glimpses of a kind of love I hadn't felt in years. Not romance, not yet. But something real, grounded, warm. When we were leaving, Emma tugged at my sleeve and handed me a small folded paper. For you, she said shyly. I unfolded it outside. It was a crayon drawing of 3 stick figures, one tall man, one small girl, and one woman with long hair. Above it, in uneven letters, me Daddy. And Lily. My breath caught. Ethan looked horrified. Oh, I swear I didn't tell her to draw that. I laughed softly, tears burning at the corner of my eyes. Relax. It's beautiful. For a moment, he just stood there, smiling. That quiet, genuine kind of smile that reaches the soul. And maybe that was the moment I realized. This wasn't just the weirdest guy at the office. This was the most honest man I'd ever met. But just when I thought I finally understood him, something happened at work the next day. Something that made me question everything. The next morning, the office felt different. The air wasn't its usual mix of printer ink and coffee. It was thicker, heavier. You know that strange silence when people stop talking the moment you walk by. Yeah, that kind. As soon as I stepped into the corridor, I could feel it. The half glances, the whispers, the hushed laughter that died when my eyes met theirs. I clutched my folder tighter. Weird, I muttered under my breath. Then I spotted Vanessa waiting by the break room door, arms crossed, a look that screamed, brace yourself. Okay. Don't freak out, she said immediately. Which of course, made me freak out. What happened? I asked. She sighed, lowering her voice. Someone saw you with Ethan yesterday. At the coffee shop. So? I said, confused. They saw you with his daughter, Lily. Vanessa cut in. And now, half the office thinks you're dating him seriously. Like stepmom material seriously. My stomach dropped. What? That's insane. She raised a brow. You know how this place is. One story turns into 10 by lunch. I looked around, noticing the sideways glances from our coworkers, the fake smiles, the whispering lips. My cheeks burned. By noon, it got worse. When I entered the meeting room, 2 colleagues fell silent mid-sentence. One smirked and said under his breath, "Wes, she's mentoring the new family man, huh?" I wanted to disappear. Ethan walked in moments later, completely unaware of the gossip storm swirling around us. He smiled, that gentle, honest smile, and greeted everyone with his usual politeness. But when his eyes met mine, he seemed to sense something was off. After the meeting, he caught up with me in the hallway. "Lily, did I do something wrong?" The concern in his voice made it even harder. "No, Ethan, you didn't." I hesitated. "People are talking about us," he asked softly. I nodded. "About you. About Emma. About everything." He exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. "Of course they are. I should have known." There was no anger in his tone, just quiet resignation, the kind of tired acceptance that comes from being misunderstood too many times. "Ethan," I began, but he stopped me with a gentle smile. "It's okay, Lily. People have always talked," he said. "When Emma's mom passed, some called me irresponsible. When I started bringing Emma to company picnics, they said I was seeking sympathy. You learn to stop defending yourself after a while." The sadness behind his calmness broke something in me. I shook my head. "That's not fair. You don't deserve that." He smiled faintly. "Life isn't about deserving, I guess. It's about showing up anyway." For a second, neither of us said anything. The world outside the glass wall kept moving. Phones ringing, people laughing, keyboards clacking. And yet, we stood there in stillness. Finally I said, "You don't have to face it alone. You know." He looked at me then. Really looked. As if trying to figure out whether he could believe that. "I'm not sure what this is between us yet," I continued, my voice soft, honest, trembling just a little. "But I know you're not the man they think you are." His eyes softened, gratitude flickering behind them. "Thank you," he said quietly. "That means more than you know." That night, I sat in bed scrolling through my messages, my mind spinning. Part of me wanted to text him. To tell him it would blow over, that people would move on. But another part knew this wasn't about rumors. It was about courage. About standing by someone when it wasn't easy. Then my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Unknown, maybe you should stay away from Ethan. He's not who you think he is." My blood ran cold. I stared at the screen, heart racing. The number wasn't saved, no name. Just a warning. And in that single moment, I realized, the rumor wasn't just gossip anymore. It was turning into something personal. But who sent that message? And why did they want me to stay away from Ethan? I stared at the message on my phone long after the screen dimmed. "Maybe you should stay away from Ethan. He's not who you think he is." The words pulsed in my head like an echo. Who would send something like that? And why did it make my chest feel heavy with a fear I couldn't explain? For hours, I tried to shake it off. But something deep inside me whispered, "This isn't just gossip." The next morning, I decided to find out. When I reached the office, Ethan wasn't at his desk. His chair sat empty, his laptop off. Vanessa caught my worried look. "He called in sick," she said quietly. "Did something happen between you two?" I hesitated, then told her about the message. She frowned. "That's messed up. Maybe someone's jealous. You know how people can't stand seeing genuine kindness anymore." Maybe she was right. But something about the tone of that message felt personal, almost protective. I couldn't focus the entire day. By evening, I made up my mind. I texted him. "Lily, are you okay? Can we talk?" A few minutes later. Ethan, "Sure, I'm at the park. Emma's feeding the ducks." When I got there, the sky was dipped in soft orange light. The kind that made everything feel like a memory. I saw Ethan sitting on a bench, watching Emma throw crumbs into the pond, her laughter echoing across the water. He looked up when I approached, tired eyes, faint smile. "You got my message?" I asked softly. He nodded. "I did. And I think I know who sent it." I blinked. "You do?" He hesitated, then sighed. "It was my late wife's sister. She's been protective of Emma since the beginning. She never really forgave me for moving on, or even for smiling again." The sadness in his voice was raw, unfiltered. "She blames me," he continued quietly, "for not saving her sister. For being too wrapped up in work when the accident happened." I sat beside him, the breeze brushing against us. "Ethan." He looked down, his voice trembling slightly. "I've spent years trying to be a good father, trying to make Emma happy. But I still wake up some nights wondering if maybe she's right. Maybe I failed them both. My throat tightened. You didn't fail anyone. He turned toward me, eyes glistening. Then why does it still hurt this much? Because you loved her, I wanted to say. Because guilt is what love leaves behind when life isn't fair. Instead, I took a deep breath and said, maybe you're not supposed to forget Ethan. Maybe you're just supposed to keep loving, in a different way. He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see it, that quiet storm inside him starting to settle. Emma came running up just then, holding a small daisy in her hand. Lily, she said excitedly. For you. I smiled, taking the tiny flower. Thank you, sweetheart. She looked at her dad, grinning. Daddy says when people give flowers, it means they make you happy. Ethan chuckled softly, his eyes never leaving mine. He's right, I said. They do. For a while, none of us spoke. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in gold and lavender. Emma danced by the pond, her laughter soft and free. The sound of healing itself. Then Ethan finally whispered, you didn't have to stay through all this, you know. I smiled faintly. Yeah, I did. Why? He asked. I met his gaze. Because sometimes the weirdest people turn out to be the realest ones. He laughed quietly, shaking his head. You're never going to let me live that down. Are you? Not a chance, I said, smiling through the ache in my heart. He reached for my hand, hesitant at first, then steady, and in that simple gesture, every misunderstanding, every awkward moment, every rumor and whisper, it all faded. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And maybe that's all love ever really needs to be. Sometimes, the right person doesn't walk into your life perfectly. They stumble in, awkward, unsure, holding their past like broken glass. But if you're brave enough to stay, you just might help them build something beautiful from the pieces.